All right, let's dive straight into this high-yield explainer. If you're prepping for your A-level tort law exam, consider this your ultimate no-nonsense checklist for mastering private nuisance. Whether you're reviewing this for the first time or doing some late-night cramming, we are going to break down the exact structure you need to score top marks, and we're only going to use the core principles and case law you actually need to know.
You're going to break this down logically. On today's agenda, we have 1. The foundations of private nuisance, 2. Unreasonable interference factors, and 3. Defenses and legal remedies.
Okay, moving right into part 1, foundations of private nuisance. When a problem question lands on your desk, your golden rule, before you do anything else, is to establish 3 core elements. First, you need an unreasonable use of land. Second, that use has to lead to an indirect interference. We're talking about loud noises or bad smells here, not somebody physically trespassing on your lawn. And third, it actually has to affect the claimant's use or enjoyment of their own property. Now, figuring out exactly who is involved is absolutely crucial. As confirmed in Hunter versus Canary Wharf, the claimant has to have a proprietary interest in the land. Basically, they need to be the owner or a legal tenant. A lodger or a family member? Yeah, that won't cut it. But the rule for defendants is way more flexible. The defendant just needs to be the person causing or even just allowing the nuisance to happen. They don't even have to own the land themselves, which perfectly tees up this idea of adopting a nuisance. This just means knowing about a danger or nuisance on your property and failing to take reasonable steps to sort it out. You don't have to be the one who started the fire, so to speak. Just sitting back and doing nothing, that can absolutely land a defendant in hot water. A truly classic example here is Sedleigh-Denfield versus O'Callaghan. So you've got this order of monks, right? They owned a ditch where some trespassers had laid a water pipe. The pipe didn't have a proper grate, it ended up getting totally blocked, and boom, it flooded the neighbor's land. Now, the monks obviously didn't lay that pipe, but they knew it was there and they completely ignored it. The big legal takeaway? An occupier who knows about a danger and just lets it continue is fully liable in nuisance. So we know the parties, we know who can sue and who gets sued, but what actually makes a standard everyday annoyance cross that line into an unlawful, unreasonable interference? Because let's be real, we all have to put up with a little bit of give and take from our neighbors.
Let's unpack that in Section 2, Unreasonable Interference Factors.
Before we go any further, take a mental screenshot of this exam gold tip. Do not, I repeat, do not just word vomit every single factor onto your exam paper. Only apply the factors that actually pop up in your specific scenario facts. If nobody is acting out of malice in the prompt, don't waste precious time writing about it. Keep it tight. Right, so the first big factor is locality. This is beautifully laid out in Sturgis versus Bridgman, where the whole vibe of the neighborhood basically dictated what was legally acceptable. In this one, a doctor built a brand new consulting room right next to a confectioner's workshop. Now, that workshop had been running noisy machinery for years, but the court actually ruled in favor of the doctor. Why? Because the area was highly residential and professional, making that level of noise and vibration a legal nuisance. And you absolutely have to memorize this quote from Lord Justice Thesiger from that very case. What would be a nuisance in Belgrave Square would not necessarily be so in Bermondsey. It just perfectly nails the idea that fancy residential squares and busy industrial areas are judged by completely different legal standards. Next up, we look at duration and intensity. Normally, a nuisance is something that happens over and over again. It's an ongoing thing. But look at Crown River Cruises versus Kimbolton Fireworks. That case proves a one-off, 20-minute event can totally be actionable if the fallout is extreme enough. A short fireworks display sent literally flaming debris raining down and completely torched a moored barge. Because the physical damage was that severe, the short time frame didn't save them. It was still a nuisance. You also need to watch out for claimants who are, well, abnormally sensitive. Being hypersensitive won't win you a claim. In Pusey versus Somerset County Council, the court made it clear, the interference has to affect the ordinary comfort of an average person. That is a sharp contrast to defendants who act out of pure malice. Just look at Hollywood's Silver Fox Farm versus Emmett. The defendant deliberately stood near the property line and fired guns just to freak out his neighbors breeding foxes after they had a petty disagreement. The really crucial point here is that malice, bad intentions, can take a totally lawful activity, like shooting on your own land, and weaponize it into an actionable nuisance. The courts will absolutely penalize you for going out of your way to deliberately annoy someone. Finally, the courts will weigh the social benefit of whatever the defendant is doing.
Take Miller versus Jackson. You've got this beloved community cricket club, but cricket balls are constantly smashing into the claimant's garden. Obviously, the club provides a great social benefit, but here's the kicker. They were still found liable for nuisance. Providing a social benefit is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. However, because of their immense value to the public, the court spared them from a strict injunction. All right, so let's say you've successfully argued the interference is unreasonable. How does the defendant fight back, and what power does the court actually have to fix it in that final section of your exam? That brings us to our final section, 3, defenses and legal remedies. One totally unique defense in private nuisance is prescription. This kicks in if an activity has been going on for at least 20 years without a single complaint. But, and this is a massive but, that 20-year clock only starts ticking the moment the activity actually becomes an actionable nuisance, not just the day the activity starts. If a factory runs noisily for 20 years but houses are only built next door in year 19, the defense completely fails. Legally, it's only been a nuisance for 1 year. And speaking of building houses next to noisy places, watch out for this classic exam trap, the whole, well, we were here first argument. It doesn't work. The Miller versus Jackson cricket case we just talked about proves that coming to the nuisance is simply never a valid defense. Choosing to move next to the nuisance doesn't suddenly excuse the defendant's unreasonable behavior. The exact same logic applies to planning permission. The modern Supreme Court case of Coventry versus Lawrence showed us that getting planning permission for, say, a noisy speedway track doesn't just hand you a free pass to annoy the neighbors. Yes, planning permission might shift the overall character of an area, but it is not an absolute bulletproof shield against a civil nuisance claim. So when it's time to actually fix the issue, the judge really has 2 main levers to pull. They can issue an injunction, which is a strict court order telling the defendant to physically stop or limit what they're doing, or they can award damages, which is just financial compensation to make up for the claimant's loss of peaceful enjoyment. Now, historically, slapping down a strict injunction was the absolute go-to move for courts. But Coventry versus Lawrence really shook things up. The Supreme Court signaled that judges should probably be awarding damages a lot more frequently, rather than just shutting businesses down completely, especially when there's a strong public interest at play, or the defendant went through the trouble of getting planning permission. When you really zoom out, the entire tort of private nuisance is just the legal art of balancing the competing interests of neighboring landowners. It's this constant, delicate tug-of-war, trying to find that perfect, equitable middle ground between one person's right to chill in their garden peacefully and another person's right to use their land however they see fit. So, as you wrap up your revision, I want you to ask yourself this. If you were the judge, sitting there balancing community benefit against private rights, would you drop the hammer with a strict injunction to protect one resident, or would you just make the noisy facility pay damages? Keep that balancing act in the back of your mind, and you are absolutely going to crush your exam. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and good luck studying.